a great web lined up today by Dr. Akuch Anyieth. We are recording today's webinar, and colleagues will be able to access this webinar afterwards through the website, but also the recording being sent to you. Throughout our session today, please feel free to pop your questions in the chat so that we can get some conversation going. Thank you. Over to you, Dala.
Thank you so much, Davinia. And again, let me welcome everyone to today's monthly webinar. This is the monthly webinar series on African Perspectives on Intercultural Competence, which is organized by the UNESCO Chair on Intercultural Competence, based at Stellenbosch University here in Stellenbosch, South Africa. And this is our core team that I'd like to introduce you to. You've just heard from one of our co-chairs, Davinia Jitu. We also have another co-chair, Precious Semba. And then as you'll see here, Dr. Akuch Anyieth is actually one of our team leads on our core team. And then you'll see others who are joining from our core team today. The work of our chair is to amplify African voices and perspectives on intercultural competence through research and through practice. And one of the key practices that our chair undertakes is the UNESCO Story Circles. And we recognize that these story circles are inspired by Indigenous traditions from around the world that have existed for centuries. And the purpose of these UNESCO Story Circles would be to practice key intercultural competencies, such as listening for understanding, instead of listening for response. And we find that as humans, we don't do the listening for understanding as much as we could and should. If you want to learn more about UNESCO Story Circles, you will see all of this available in an open access manual through UNESCO. And our partner, the World Council on Intercultural and Global Competence, is also offering a training on story circles next month as part of their global forum. So we do have an invitation for you to join the World Council on Intercultural and Global Competence. It's entirely free to join, and they are one of our partners. And you can join through the website by completing the brief online form. And we hope you'll want to do so because there are over 20 different working groups in the World Council, and one of those is the ICC in Africa Working Group, which is very closely connected to this webinar series. And in fact, next week on Monday, we invite all of you to join the ICC in Africa Working Group when we'll be able to dialogue even more with today's speaker. We also want to highlight some upcoming events. As I mentioned, Monday is our ICC in Africa Working Group monthly meeting, and we hope all of you will be able to come back and join us for that. We'll put the link in chat and send that out to you all. But also, if you'll join the World Council, you'll find it that way as well. We also want to invite all of you to join us for our April webinar, which takes place on April 28th. And that's featuring Jessica Uris, and she is an amazing global youth leader. And we hope you'll come and be able to learn and listen from what she has to share. And then we especially want to extend an invitation to our in-person Intercultural Conference. This will be our third annual UNESCO Chair Intercultural Conference. It will be taking place in Dakar, Senegal, in the middle of October. You see the date on your screen, 12th to the 16th of October. And there's still time to submit a proposal. So we hope each of you listening and participating today will submit a proposal by April 1, and we'll put that information in the chat as well. And then, of course, we hope to see all of you in person in Senegal in October. So with that, I want to turn it back to our co-chair, Davinia Jitu, who will introduce today's speaker and will also help moderate the discussion and Q&A at the end. Back to you, Davinia.
Thank you. Thanks, Dala. So colleagues, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Akuch Anyieth. our colleague will be speaking on educating for humanity, social emotional learning, and intercultural competence in Africa's next generation. Um, so Dr. Akuch Anyieth is a South Sudanese Australian scholar whose research explores gender, law, and cultural practice in context of displacement and post-conflict societies. She holds a PhD from La Trobe University, where her work examined the intersections of Australian family law and South Sudanese cultural approaches to family violence. Currently, a research fellow at the Center for the Study of the Afterlife and Violence and Reparative Quest, AVREC, Stellenbosch University, and affiliated with La Trobe University, she investigates gender-based violence, legal interventions, intercommunal conflict, and the politics of repair in South Sudan and the diaspora. Her scholarship blends feminist theory, trauma-informed methodologies, and decolonial perspectives to integrate how cultural norms shape responses to violence and justice. As part of her decolonial research methodologies, Dr. Anyieth has collaborated with Indigenous communities in Australia through yarning circles to center relational and community-based knowledge systems. She has written extensively on family violence, trauma, African masculinities, and healing within migrant and refugee communities. A frequent keynote speaker and policy consultant, she has advised on gender, justice, and peace building for organizations, including the UN and the Australian Family Law Council. So I hand over to Dr. Anyieth, and we're looking forward to her talk.
Thank you so much, Davinia, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm hoping that it's going to be a collaborative and engaging conversation. So my presentation won't be long because I'd like to spend a bit more time with you unpacking some of the stuff that I will discuss in my presentation during the Q&A. Let me just share my screen.
Sorry,
Can you all see my screen?
we just need to make an announcement.
And we do ask if everyone could please mute, except for Dr. Anyieth. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to be presenting from some of my preliminary finding from a research study that I conducted from November to late January this year in South Sudan. The research looked at the experiences of intercommunal violence in South Sudan and how families, and particularly women, are placed in a position or discriminated against in positions of peace building within communities that have been affected by the intercommunal violence. So I'm still coding and analyzing the data for this research. So today I'm just presenting some of the findings from the women group, and I will speak a little bit more momentarily in terms of the different groups that were interviewed. I will start the presentation by opening with this quote, which I think sort of summarize what I would speak about today. So I am technically starting from the end at the beginning, just to set the conversation into perspective. And I will read the quote. I was raped and shot in my shoulder during the 2013 conflict. They wanted to kill me, but I survived. By luck, the bullet missed my heart and struck my shoulder instead. Even though they tried to take my life, I am still here now, and I make sure to support young women and girls who have experienced similar violence. I speak with them, care for them, and make sure they do not go through it alone. Without support, it is easy to lose yourself or even to feel like life is no longer worth living. I do not want that for them. I am here to use my pain to support my community, said Monica, one of the participants women group I interviewed. So the conversation around peace building in South Sudan is centered around a top-down approach where governments are making policies that are informed by internal and external institutions and stakeholders, such as the African Union. However, my research is trying to rethink women, violence, and peace building, which moves beyond seeing women just as victims, but as community members of South Sudan that have agency, and to focus on what is missing, which is the women's voices in this conversation of peace building post the war. It is problematic that when we present women in conflict-affected communities only as victims, we miss a lot in the conversation and we marginalize their voices. Yes, my work acknowledges the pain and the experiences of victimization women go through in conflict-affected societies such as South Sudan. However, victimhood alone depoliticizes the agency of women. It creates passivity and it flattened their identity only to being victim other than agents of change and contributing actors in the process of peace building. And you will see that clearly in some of the quotes that I will read out momentarily. Their huge contribution to these processes and contribution that is often not recognized by politicians, by practitioners in the systems and in the legal system, as well as in social services in the country. So in my research, I centered around, for today's talk, I'm looking at why is the focus only on institutional reform? Although that is important, institutional reform should be coupled with community and grassroots initiatives that are also doing the work of reform, instead of focusing on external frameworks, which miss everyday practices within families by women, which are practices that hold society and communities together. This research was a qualitative research. As I mentioned earlier in my introduction, fieldwork was conducted in South Sudan, in Juba, which is the capital city, in Rumbek, and in Bor, two neighboring biggest cities in South Sudan. Interviews were conducted with women groups, community leaders, and customary law practitioners and chief, as well as statutory law practitioners. So there were 4 groups interviewed, and those 4 groups is what they form the bulk of my data. However, as I mentioned earlier today, I'm just focusing on the interviews with the women. The processes of peace building and repair currently in South Sudan is sort of compartmentalized as follows. 1, there's continuing ongoing violence in the country in different regions in South Sudan, which is happening in the backdrop of the war in Sudan, which I hope we all know about. And that has created massive displacement within the country. So there's a lot of families living in displacement camps. There's ongoing insecurity in different regions in South Sudan, hence why my data was only collected in Juba, Rumbek, and Bor because of the insecurity and inaccessibility of other regions that I could have gone into to do the interviews. So from the data, I asked, what does the processes of repair look like? Because there's so many things going on at the same time. There's conflicts, ongoing violence, there's displacement, which increase insecurity. And then there's also the government focus on the process of repair, or so-called TRC, Truth Commission, which is currently being formed in South Sudan. So how do you come to the decision that you want to embark on the process of truth-telling when certain communities are still being faced with violence and politically restricted to speak the truth, which is the whole point of truth and reconciliation processes. So some of my findings, I've sort of categorized them into groups. One of the findings in the areas that I am focusing on currently is women as mediators of family dispute, of preventing escalation of violence and relational authority within the individual communities. Now I read one other quote here from a female participant. They may not recognize us in meetings or give us title, but in the home and in the community, we are the ones who hold communities together. We intervene early because we understand that today's family dispute can become tomorrow's communal conflict. Our authority comes from responsibility to keep people connected because of our humanity depend on one another. This quote, I think, is alluding to the idea of the African philosophy of Ubuntu, that we depend on each other for survival and we live through each other. In a nutshell, there's me because of you and you are because of me. Another area of my focus is women as moral authorities, which advise leaders, so doing the background work of advising customary practitioners, advising community leaders, and even sometimes advising statutory law practitioners such as lawyers that comes into local villages or into the local community to seek advice when they are faced with challenges that are so quote unquote traditional or come from cultural practices that the adversarial system can fails to capture in its essence. Also use of moral discourse and how it shapes community norms and their families' norms. And I quote again from a participant, Achwil, who says, other women and I in our community have gone through so much during this war and the ongoing violence and insecurity. We have experienced abuse, witnessed the death of our children, and for some of us, the killing of our husband. Yet, we are not only defined by this suffering. Our role is also to speak into moments where things can break, when relationships are strained and conflict begins to grow. We draw on memory, on kinship ties, and on what is expected of us as a community. Authority does not always come from position. It comes from the ability to restore what holds peoples together. So again, speaking to the idea that though we are seen by our politician or by the government as people in the background, we are occupying one of the most important positions in the society, which is to hold kinship ties together, to ensure that although there's ongoing war, there's also work of repair that we are doing behind the scene of the ongoing war or the ongoing conflict in different regions. And last thing but not least is women in conflict, which I interpret this finding as a way of negotiating tension and discouraging retaliation within communities, which Regina speaks to so well in this quote. You know, we are living here in this displacement camp. This is an interview in one of the displacement camps in South Sudan, where people from many different ethnic groups are brought together. This can sometimes lead to disagreement and conflict, but we try to speak to our young people. We tell them that even if they have a misunderstanding with someone from another community, it must not grow into violence. Because if we start fighting again here, where will we go? We must work hard and intentionally to maintain peace. Young people do not always listen. They sometimes follow their own path. But as parents, as mothers, we do our best to let the men fight if they choose to, but let us not fight as well. Meaning, as we sit in the displacement camp, while the men are at war, it is their responsibility, as Regina puts it, to keep the peace within the displacement camp. Because even within the displacement camp, they are sometimes places of tension, of high emotions, where different tribal groups that are being hosted by NGOs can also perpetuate the ongoing conflict in the country or the ongoing political differences in the country, and that can cause violence in these displacement camp. So the women are saying it is our role as the women in the displacement camp to ensure that that does not occur and that the young people are protected and guided by the elders and by the women to respect one another and to build meaningful relationship that goes against the ongoing conflict in the country. Some of the constraints that I like to mention, and there's more in my data, but for the sake of just this presentation, I've only just focused on two. One is that South Sudan is a patriarchal society, and that means there's limited recognition in terms of human rights as girls' rights and women's rights as human rights. As Akir mentioned here, the role and the disadvantage that these patriarchal systems and cultural belief, as well as political belief that are very much patriarchal, limits women's ability to be recognized as true actors or true contributors to peace building and to truth telling. And she said, in our community, decisions are often made by men, and our voices are not always recognized in public spaces. But we are there in the background. Again, the word background keeps coming up. In the home, in the conversation that shapes what happens next. Even when we are not seen, we carry the work of holding relationships together. Again, the word relationship and keeping relationships together is a recurrent theme among the women's interviews. So what does this mean for intercultural competency? What are some of the lessons that we can learn from the glimpses from my study and the quote that I've just shared with you? One is recognizing existing knowledge system within grassroots communities, which the women in my research have shared so much about existing knowledge within their grassroots communities and how they rely on those existing knowledge because there are limited functioning systems of repair that they rely on those existing knowledge to ensure that their reparative works is continuing within their local communities. And so therefore, peace-building knowledge does not only reside in formal institutions, as we've seen in this quote, or external frameworks. Women's practices of mediation, care, and reflect deeply embedded context-specific knowledge that must be acknowledged as legitimate and as valuable knowledge in the processes of repair or in the processes of truth-seeking in a country that has been facing civil unrest such as war. A second one is working with the women rather than against, and working with local system rather than against local systems, and recognizing customary and community-based systems which are not static, they are dynamic and evolving. And systems and peace-building practitioners or actors, knowledge should evolve with the communities that are evolving and with the community belief that are evolving. Meaning engagement requires working within these systems while also critically supporting spaces for transformation, particularly in relation to gender and specifically to gender inequality in countries such as South Sudan, where it's still very much patriarchal and there's limited ability to really enhance the work of gender equality and in eradicating violence such as gender-based violence. So in conclusion, I conclude that women sustain peace in their own communities, and they do that through everyday repair, which matters within their individual communities. And we need to recognize that work at a grassroots level as real work that can actually inform policy and that can also be adapted in other parts of the world, such as neighboring countries, Sudan, which is currently going through war, and hopefully when they cease fire, they will also go through practices of repair and truth and reconciliation. I also did some interviews in Sudan across the border, but I will not discuss them today, but some of the findings as well with the women across the border in Sudan were also alluding to the fact that while there's an ongoing war, they are also doing their very best to ensure lives continue in terms of looking after the children, looking after the sick and the aged and the elderly, as well as young people and men that are wounded during the war. So they're not only having the burden of escaping the war and ensuring that they themselves are safe, but they are tasked with a bigger responsibility, which is to take care of everyone and everything around them as the war continues. And last but not least, peace is relational, as we heard in the quote that I've read. And I intentionally base my presentation today heavily on quotation from the interviews, because my research is centered around the voices of the voiceless, so to speak, in our communities or in our society. So I quote a lot in my writing and in my research to bring forward the voices of my participants rather than theorizing too much, which sometimes as academics we tend to do that. And there's a space, and it's very important that we theorize discourses, but at the same time, participant voices or the community voices, it's very relevant and it's very important and contextually important, particularly for countries like South Sudan, where you don't hear much about research on peace building and involvement of women and women's role in maintaining and sustaining and informing the processes of peace. Thank you. I will hand over now to Davinia, who's going to moderate a Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anyieth, for those insights into, you know, different examples of peace building and how the quiet strength of women really hold that together without us sometimes even realizing, women just do what they need to do without being recognized for the role that they play. I think, you spoke earlier about truth and reconciliation, and I think we've seen from the South African experience that, we needed the values within our different cultures to guide that peace building. In some of the TRC cases here in South Africa, we saw how it was the women of the families that carried the families forward, really, with that quiet strength. But that those lessons in South Africa weren't really taken forward sustainably, We hear those stories and then those stories stay there in our history. We don't bring them into our everyday lives. So I think for me, this research that you've done is really imperative to show, how we can integrate this into our everyday lives and society, so that we learn from it and we have impact from it. But I want to open up to the floor because we have some time to have some engagement around your research and see if we have any comments or questions or someone who wants to add their own story to this discussion. So colleagues, I know that you are posting into the chat, but it would be great if you could also unmute and maybe pose your comments and your questions to Dr. Anyieth, because this is a chance for you to engage with her as well. While I'm looking at the chat to see what the questions are. I see one from Atle Hang. She says, thank you for the presentation, Dr. Anyieth. What is being done to empower these women to be contributors as mediators, moral authorities? Do they have access to a level of education and a platform to practice their knowledge?
Thank you. That's a very important question, particularly the education part of it, which I didn't highlight in my presentation. So I think it's good that we unpack that a little bit. The level of education in South Sudan for women varies. Younger women tend to be more educated because of how education came into place and how it has improved since the Civil War. Because during the Civil War, there was little to no institution that are providing education to the young people or to the community. So the older women are a little bit less educated, which means it's a challenge in terms of how they contribute to policy and to services or to government agencies that are working on peace building processes. So some of the initiatives that have been set up in the country is to pick community leaders in local communities that are women to represent the voices of the women that are unable to read or write. So if a commissioner go to a particular community, there's one woman that can read and that can write and that can speak English or Arabic or Dinka or Nuer, which are the four main languages spoken, that tends to act as a voice for the women in that community. There are also commissioners that speak local languages, and that work closely with customary law chiefs. A few years ago, customary law chiefs were mainly men, and of course that has been challenged through research, through advocacy in the country. And so now they have customary legal practitioners as women who actually represent women voices in dispute resolution and in community and family dispute matters, which I think is a great progress. But in terms of education, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on that level, which is very difficult considering the insecurity in the country. So even young people themselves, access to Juba, which is where most of the schools are, such as the universities, it's quite difficult, especially when you are in a region that is being occupied by the warring political parties, that you can't access education. So I think the focus now is to ensure that there is peace and that the conflicts between the two warring political actors stops. And so the actual work of repair, the actual work of education and provision of social services can start and can be sustained, because it keeps getting interrupted by this war. Because after the civil war in 2005, and then South Sudan became independent in 2011, there was a small period of peace where there was a ceasefire and education facilities were open. And then there was the 2013 civil war again, and then there was the 2016. So there's gaps where there's peace, and then actors start to work on education facilities and improving social services, and then there's war again, which takes us back and destabilize everything. So it's an ongoing dance between war, peace, and what is going on here in the middle within the families, I think, is where we're really missing the point of how can we truly maintain peace if we're not listening to voices across different generations and genders.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anyieth. We have another question that relates to your research process. And this is from Honorine Yu. Dr. Anyieth, thank you for your insightful presentation. I'm particularly interested in your methodological approach. Could you elaborate on how you navigated ethical considerations when conducting interviews in this conflict-affected setting, particularly in relation to participant safety, any language barriers, and how you adapted your methods to realities of ongoing instability?
Ethics traumatized me before I traveled. So that's a very good question, and also a triggering question for me. I had to get two institutional ethics, so Stellenbosch and South Sudan. Stellenbosch was easier because the South Sudan was already obtained, which is the one that took the most time. So like I said in my presentation, it was a qualitative research. So I wanted to do interviews with the different groups that I have named. So I applied for ethics approval at the University of Juba in South Sudan. And they required a lot of things, like psychosocial service support, interpreters. But I was able to negotiate the need of it for interpreters because I speak the three languages that are predominantly spoken in the country. So that eased that process a little bit. And in terms of psychosocial services, there are practitioners in South Sudan, though they are based as part of NGO work, such as United Nations, UNICEF. So I was able to communicate with them and get access to their therapists, just in case participant needed psychosocial services at the end of interview or before the interview or during the interview. Then I had a service that was partnering with my project that I can refer the participant to, which was quite key for this particular research, and ethics committee was quite adamant about that, which I agree. So the whole process of ethics took several months, almost took 8 months, just to get all the supporting actors in place to support this study. In terms of being physically in South Sudan, I was able to be assigned to 2 research assistants at the University of Juba and a security. The University of Juba was very much in support of the research. So they were able to assign a security and 2 research assistants that traveled with me within the country. We had to navigate challenges around accessibility, of course. So areas where there was still ongoing conflicts, we were not able to access those areas. We could only access areas that were safe and where United Nations or UNICEF or any other NGOs have set up internal displacement camps, and we were able to access the camp through the NGOs and through community leaders, which is where relationship with gatekeepers was quite important for me. So community leaders, customary law practitioners, statutory practitioners in Juba were quite key, because these were people that were already engaging with the community because of the conflicts, and were already engaging with the community through provision of psychosocial services and other services that people needed in displacement camp. So I wasn't directly walking into the communities and contacting communities myself. There were a lot of actors that were put in place to aid that relationship. And it was a fragile relationship, so obviously it took time. We waited a lot on different kinds of approval, different kinds of support within the camps and outside the camp.
Thank you. I see we have a hand raised. Kels Park, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the talk. And yeah, I am calling in from Boston in the US and work in the field of mediation and restorative justice. And something I've been noticing is that like with mediation, there's a lot of these sort of like corporate agencies that get formed, and you alluded to like it can be a very male dominated field in terms of it being a profession. But I studied abroad in Rwanda and noticed some similar dynamics that you mentioned in terms of these like collectives of women getting together like after they'd lost family members and trying to do like really important healing work in their communities. So I guess what I'm wondering is like, do you have any thoughts around how to leverage those skill sets, and if folks are interested, like if the women you spoke to are interested in like actually educating folks on the skills that they have, or if the piece around like getting their stories out seems like the priority?
Thank you, and thank you for calling in from afar, from such a far place. I appreciate you being here and your question and reflection around Congo. I think Congo is such a unique case study, particularly for the East African countries that have gone through war and civil unrest. Your question around how can we recognize these women's voices and knowledge, and how can they share that and pass that on to services or the next generation? I'm paraphrasing your question here, but I think first is to recognize them as valuable skill sets. It's not just stories where women are sitting around in circle and sharing their stories. It starts like that, but they are valuable skill set to our society and to the processes of repair. That's first. Second, actors that especially internal actors that goes into South Sudan or any other country that is going through processes of peace building, should enter these environments with understanding that knowledge exists there, and they are going to build on that knowledge. They're not going to enforce their own knowledge on these communities. And so therefore, working with these women is to also involve them at the high level at political conversation, for example. I have a colleague currently who is also an Australian South Sudanese who's doing, he called them peace work conversation around South Sudan. And he brings South Sudanese women, young people, and men from different tribal groups that are not, so to speak, not getting along. And they sit down and they really share deeply from their heart about some of the challenges that they're facing. And the way he approaches it is not there as a mediator, is there to bring people together and to listen and to learn. So taking the position of, I'm here to listen and to learn from you, as well as contribute what I know, is so important, because communities in conflict-affected societies sometimes are overly researched and overly asked to share their experiences. So sharing fatigue is a thing, like they can actually feel that constantly being asked to share your stories and you don't see the result that come out of those sharing those stories can be discouraging with the communities and among the women. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm very much in agreement with you that these are valuable skills that needs to be recognized, and we need to work with them rather than for them when we are in the field to either mediate or to collect data or to facilitate peace building conversation in countries such as South Sudan.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's what I was wondering is going beyond just storytellers, but actually knowledge keepers and like folks that have skill sets that can be shared and utilized. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Anyieth. I think that that last answer that you gave about, us as academics and researchers in the field, as much as we have good intentions to be really mindful of how we work with communities, so that the impact of our work is not negative on them. And I think the part of your answer that stands out for me is that we work with communities, and it's not just about us and our research and our universities. It's really about being able to work with them to see, a change for them as well. I'm not sure if there are any more questions.
There is one more that's very related to the discussion we just had.
I didn't see it.
From Yamina.
Yes, from Yamina.
Mm-hmm.
What are the benefits or gains for the participants in the project? What is the social impact of the project for the communities?
Well, there are long-term and short-term benefits. Short-term benefits are, one, this project is a part of a bigger project that will take me back to South Sudan at the end of this year, hopefully. And the work that we're doing as a build-up from this project is to create an information booklet for practitioners who goes into South Sudan as peace-building mediators in terms of how to approach communities and how to do intercultural how to hold intercultural conversation or mediation in a respectful and culturally informed way. So that's the short-term project that we're working on now, which is building on from this research. Long-term project is I will be involved in the Peace, Truth and Reconciliation processes, which is a group that is being established now in South Sudan. So we have we've long listed and shortlisted names of potential commissioners, and that list is currently sitting with the Minister of Justice. And because of what is going on in the country, such as the ongoing trial of former Vice President Riek Machar, a lot of things in terms of the criminal justice system are almost on a standstill because of the trial. And the trial is very sensitive in terms of the history behind the trial and how it's informing the current political climate. It's not the right time to have a trial like that. If I speak as a legal scholar, but the trial is happening anyway. So the processes of peace building, of Truth and Reconciliation Commission will start soon, and my team and I will be heavily involved, not only as an academic who have studied the field, but as also community members that are relationship with different groups in communities and different regions in South Sudan. So those are some of the long-term game, and obviously we are pushing for some of the findings to be to inform policy. I know it's such a cliche to say because every researcher says my research is going to inform policy, but the reality for this research is to really do push for it to inform policy, because some of the findings and the voices of women there, it would be such a great loss for the country not to use this data to inform the policies around not just peace building, but also around gender-based violence and intimate and family and domestic violence. So the benefit in terms of reforming policy from this research will go far more beyond just looking at the process of peace building, which is a great thing when you go into the field and you uncover or unearth a lot of information that can actually inform other aspects of life, because they all intersect. The experiences of gender-based violence in the country, the political violence, the communal violence, it all intersect, and it comes down to families being displaced, families being living in constant fear and in very insecure places in the country and in the region. So those are some of the short-term and the long-term benefit that we hope that will come out of this study.
Thank you, Dr. Anyieth. We have 2 more hands raised, and I think because we are running out of time, I'm going to say that we take these last 2 questions, and then we'll wrap up. Prof. Tudil, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Please go ahead with your question.
Yes, you did. Actually, hi. How are you?
I didn't know you were here. It's so good to see you.
So for me, it wasn't rather a question, but a comment to just commend you, Doc, for, and I think the last person that had the question is, what is the benefit? The benefit is actually having our own people do our own research and owning our own narrative. Because when non-natives go back into the communities, they tend to come in with their own biases, you know, whether we like it or not. We're all human beings. And I love the other colleague from Boston. I too, I'm in mediation and restorative work as well, and did some work in the US. And the danger of a single story that often happens to those that may not know the nuances of our cultures and our indigenous knowledge, because war has really eroded our indigenous systems, right? Because we're losing knowledge to those that were lost to violence, the elders that are dying. So for those of us like Doc that are trying to go back and excavate what we know, it's the overall benefit of this is our story, this is our methodology, this is our way. Yes, there are some other things that we can borrow from other people, like in South Africa, but our conflict is so unique that perpetrators have become victims, victims have become perpetrators. Then how do you really go about it? Because this is not the first time that we are solving conflict. We've been in communities, right? Let's talk about cattle raiding communities. We've always had a restorative practice included within the mediation aspect of it. And often as women, right? I can remember my late grandmother, she was like, well, as a woman, just by crying, there's a particular cry that she can summon war or stop war, right? And so, but a foreigner coming into our indigenous way would never know that there are ways that women and can actually be, violence destructors, or they could actually perpetrate violence as well, just indigenously doing that. So the more we go in and tell our own stories, our people feel comfortable, right? Because there's also performative when we're doing researches, right? If a white person comes in, we have to perform. But when it's us, you can just relax and drink tea and say, here is the real what's happening, right? And especially when it's intercommunal violence, and the nuances of the othering we do to each other. A white person could never understand when Nuer people call an Equatorian yam yam. They may think it's a hate speech, but actually there is a historical teasing behind it, because there's legends and stories of migration. When you go to this side, and if you don't come back because it was so far away, then these people must have eaten them and whatnot. So there's all these other stories. So I just wanted to commend you, Doc, for owning our narrative and, for bringing it to light in our own voices, and in that you're a part of it, but outside of it, if it makes sense. So that's where I just wanted to comment as to what are the benefits of us owning and telling our own stories in our own voices. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Naomi. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Prof. Teal. We have another hand raised by Lukong Shulika. Please go ahead.
Hi, good day. Thank you so much for the presentation. Mine is just a little contribution that comes with a question, because when I did my PhD, it was on women and peace building in Liberia, and I was there present to collect data as well. And one of the major findings I had for my work was the women making me understand that they had to push to be at the national level, because when the conflict started, they were at the bottom level trying to do the needful. However, with time, they turned up their bottom energy into bottom-up pressure, thereby ensuring that their local insight, what they were doing at the grassroots level, could be dictated at the national level. And that led to the story we hear today about Liberia. So my question with regards to the presentation now was, is there something similar happening in South Sudan, or it is different? It is a different scenario altogether there.
In terms of women having to push for their voice to be recognized at a national level, is that your question?
Yes.
Yes, 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 and yes. I think women voices in conflict zone in general, there's a lot of literature that does show that when peace building processes start, they usually start by men. And so therefore, women often have to fight their way through politics that marginalize them in order for their voices to be heard. And that's why I think research such as yours, in your PhD, and such as mine now, what that are being conducted by women, by fellow women, are so important in terms of elevating and contributing women voices at a national level. As I mentioned in the presentation earlier, politically, South Sudan is a very patriarchal society. So you see positions of power being occupied by men. And I'm not saying there are no women who are in a position of power, but it's a very limited and it's a very small number. And the reason for that is simply because women's ability to lead and to make decisions and to contribute to processes of repair or to peace building is rarely recognized. It somehow always have to come from a man for politicians to recognize as truth and as valid or credible information that can be that can inform policy. So I particularly focus on presenting on women just not as just victim, but women beyond victimhood, which is how they see them in the country. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I am in agreement with you in terms of some of your finding in your PhD research.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, we have run out of time, unfortunately. I am really sad about that because I kind of didn't even realize the time. I was just enjoying this conversation. But we are going to have our ICC in Africa meetup next week, as Dala mentioned before. And this is a space where we can continue this conversation, and I'm very much looking forward to that. So on that note, perhaps I can hand back over to Dala just to close off this session, but also say a very big thank you to Dr. Akuch Anyieth for this really, I mean, insightful isn't even the word. It's, yeah, I don't even have the words to describe the session, but just to know that, you know, I'm wanting to have even more of a conversation around it. So yeah, back over to you, Dala.
Thanks so much, Davinia. And yes, we'll continue this discussion on Monday. We hope all of you can join us. It's from 2 to 3 p.m. Central African time here in South Africa. We will be sending a copy of the recording and a link to that Monday discussion. So be watching for that. And we hope you can all continue this conversation then. And to also join us next month, April 28th, for our next installment of this African Perspectives on Intercultural Competence webinar series. And a final reminder that we hope all of you will submit a session proposal by April 1 for the upcoming UNESCO Chair Intercultural Conference in Dakar, Senegal. We did put the links in the chat, and we will include those again as well. Thanks to all of you for your time in joining us today. Thank you to our co-chair, Dr. Davinia Jittu, for moderating today's webinar. And most of all, a huge thank you to Dr. Akuch Anyieth for sharing with us of your so important work that you're doing in South Sudan and looking at women's role as peace builders, which, of course, peace we are so much in need of. The world is so much in need of more than ever. So thank you so much for your important work you're doing, for sharing that with us. Thanks to all of you again for joining, and we hope to see you back here on Monday. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Let's sign out.